In the Best Animation category, we honor the studios and artists who have pushed the boundaries of creativity and innovation, delivering jaw dropping sequences that leave us spellbound. From epic battles to tender moments of introspection, these animations have elevated storytelling to new heights, immersing us in worlds beyond imagination. So, without further ado, here are your nominees for Best Animation of 2023.
And your juror winner for this year is Onimai, I'm Now Your Sister. And your public winner is Jujutsu Kaisen Season 2.
Jamal, I have a sister, and I think I would know if you were my sister. So I would appreciate if you don't lie to the audience like that. But in all seriousness, these results to me aren't that surprising. But as someone who's new to the awards, I imagine they would be for you. Do you think that's correct?
To an extent, I don't know. I think Onimai is very much like a captivating show from a movement perspective for some reasons, of course. Um, that said, I understand why people would be drawn to these, and Jujutsu Kaisen Season 2 especially is one that I know that people are drawn to because it's really like it's an action fest, and that is very interesting to watch for a lot of people, myself included. And so, yeah, I see how people came to this conclusion.
Now the thing is, everything that I've heard about Jujutsu Kaisen season 2 this year is has been all about how the production is falling apart. Like, the animators are all stressed and they're like writing cryptic messages on Twitter that get deleted immediately about how everything's going horribly. Is the animation holding up despite all that?
I would say that there's definitely some really big highs in Jujutsu Kaisen Season 2. While I would say that there is a degree of inconsistency and there is like a lack of refinement in some places, it would be kind of hard to lie and say that there isn't something worth talking about because there definitely is. And it's a very explosive season to say the least. If we're talking about the Shibuya incident arc, as well as Hidden Inventory as well. I think especially since the shift in director to Jota Goshizano, I was very excited just because I knew that they were going to bring a lot more talent on board for this season, and it's very evident that that's the case. There are some really high highs. So if you look to episode 5, for example, animation direction with like Sota Yamazaki and Taki Ninuma, they paint this very like visceral picture of the Jujutsu world. Or if we move it to the Shibuya arc, you have stuff like episode 16 and 17, so the Thunderclap part 1 and 2 episodes. They get extremely comical and creative and almost create this like reality bending experience just through all the different approaches that are in play. And so I think as a result, even though there is something to be said about the production and whatnot, and I'm not really dismissing that, I think there is something really, really crazy under the surface of all of that. And that did come out for quite a lot of that season, especially in those most intense moments.
That's a really good point. It really is a sort of like peaks and valleys situation where you have those highs like you were talking about, and then you have that scene where Yuji is fighting like a big grasshopper or something, and it's just their arms going. It's like 2 frames that they just switch back and forth really quickly. Thalu, now that we've talked about Jujutsu, exactly what about Onimai? I know that the awards in the past has had this contention between character acting and like kind of more action. Is it just character acting that Onimai excels at, or what exactly propels it to top of animation?
There was actually a really close call between Heavenly Delusion and Onimai, and at the end of it, it did kind of come down to that character acting. But the main takeaway is there's just so much variety in the type of cuts that are used in the show. Heavenly Delusion does a really good job at having those silly moments, but also having these really well acted and almost like realistic kind of motions for characters, especially considering the character designs that the show has. But it just kind of came down, like I said, to the like, overall expressiveness and how varied it was in Onimai. They're both very capable shows. It just kind of came down to which one slightly excels over the other.
Can you give me like one or two moments in Onimai that stick out to you that was discussed as examples of great animation?
It's hard to pick out specific ones because there's so many, but I'll go with one that stood out to me a lot. I believe it's in either the last episode or the second last episode. They go to like an outing to the hot springs, and they enter the room that they're staying in, and it's this held really interesting layout of the room, but every single character is moving in the scene, doing different things, and it lasts for about a minute. And that kind of overwhelming amount of character acting in a single scene is really impressive, and I think it reflects kind of the highlights of Onimai. There's scenes like that in Heavenly Delusion, but watching Onimai, those just stood out more to me just because of how well it gave those characters like a very set way to move that reflected their character, and I think it just was that bit more appealing to watch.
Is it kind of like a rap song where like you don't get all the like innuendos and euphemisms the first time around, but the more you listen to it, the different things you'll catch?
I think so. Definitely going back, there's more, moments that I really appreciate. Sometimes when you're going through, things happen so quickly, you don't really grasp them fully, but I do think there's a fair amount in the show that really captivates you the first time and keeps captivating you once you go back through. And that's another thing, a lot of these shows will go through and watch scenes multiple times when we're comparing. So when they're able to have that level of finesse from the staff, but also still just be that kind of like creative freedom level that really, makes you feel emotional when you're watching something, I think that's one of the reasons why it's so high.
Jamal, what are your kind of personal biases when it comes to animation? What are the things that you like, that you look for, that you consider good animation? And does that show up in any of these nominees here?
I would say there's something that I have been thinking about a lot when it comes to what I classify as good animation and or what we consider as the best animation. I was thinking about that obviously in preparation for these awards. And I feel like it's very good to make a distinction between what moves the most and what moves perhaps the most effectively. And I think that changes my mindset a lot when I look at a series of nominations because while there are some things that, yeah, move a lot and regularly, it doesn't necessarily mean that I think they're the best at communicating what the story is about or what it's trying to say and whatnot. And so that said, I do think that I do lean a lot into like acting and whatnot. I love action and there are different sorts of action too, but I do lean into acting as being a really great expression of that since I think especially when it comes to communicating how people feel and how characters feel. There's only so much characterization I feel like you can do through acting alone. I'm sorry, through action alone. And so I think that more subtle acting seen in, for example, Serene or even in shows like Heavenly Delusion at points, I think appeals to me a bit more, but I still think that that doesn't necessarily mean that like, oh, this is the only way you can characterize, but it's the characterization that does appeal to me.
One of the things about animation that I've really come to love over the years is just how different it is, right? So we classify all these things as anime, but looking at Demon Slayer to Jujutsu Kaisen to Onimai, obviously a big difference. One of the things that sticks out to me on this list is Scott Pilgrim, considering that it was done by, I was gonna say Masaki Yuasa. It's not. It's just done by Science Saru. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's a show by Awa Gongora, at least
Mm.
directed by him. Yeah.
But the thing is, it's obviously done in more kind of a Western style, right? What did you all think of Scott Pilgrim's animation and how it informs the show?
I think it was a really good showing from the team at Science Saru, and I think what makes it a really good contender and very unique contender amongst them all is really how it's very focused on posing, has very strong defined posing, which I think I wouldn't say is counter to Japanese styles of animation because there are some styles that very much focus on that too. But I think it works very well for Scott Pilgrim specifically because it's very retro comic book and like game inspired. And those are very much focused on these like very distinct poses and holding them, as you sort of turn the pages of a comic and go through the panels, you get these very strong, distinct poses. And I think Scott Pilgrim riffs on that very well, and then like the very larger than life characters work very well with that too because you have this very snappy, almost very low frame count sort of things going on, and it works very well for these characters that are constantly feeling different things and says a lot about like the evil exes and whatnot. So I think Scott Pilgrim is a really cool way to like shake up this category because it does things quite differently to what a lot of the other ones do. I think that makes it really unique and made it quite fun to watch and quite refreshing actually throughout the year.
Were those some talking points you discussed, Delu, in the category?
Yeah, absolutely, especially the interesting posing that was brought up. Another nominee, Bungo Stray Dogs, has a very similar kind of approach. The actual, I guess you'd say, amount of animation or cuts throughout aren't as, long or maybe as complex as some of the other titles here, like Jujutsu Kaisen, for example. But it's the actual character posing and how engaging it can be just from those kind of movements that really benefit the show. And it's kind of like really smart directing in a sense, being able to understand that you don't need to display constant movement to convey something or a sort of emotion or action properly. And that's one thing that really shined in Scott.
Just animation, like period, like the actual literal art of animation, but more so the use of animation and knowing when to go insane and when to kind of pull back.
Exactly. There's a lot in Scott that I would kind of call, I guess, looping, where there'll be a movement where it goes from one pose, they'll kind of loop some sort of small movements within that, and then it'll go to the next one. And there's definitely huge moments that are super dynamic and really creative. You can tell that they brought on some crazy individuals to animate them, but it's that consistency throughout the show where you have such strong posing that really gives it that striking appearance, especially because the general aesthetic is very different, very comic book leaning. So I think it does well with that regard.
Now, this is just something I'm personally curious about. There's a lot of idol anime, right? Like you've got Uma Musume, which is like they call it an idol. It's more about racing, but there's idol stuff in it. There's Idol Master. There's Oshinoko, and everything didn't do that well. What were the thoughts about idol shows and like? Because I imagine with the animation, it's a lot about the dancing and the performances, and I imagine that's pretty hard to do really well.
Yeah, it's interesting this year. There's definitely a lot of idol shows that not only are kind of shown to maybe like a juror team that has to watch everything, but the general public as well. That's just very popular, like Oshinoko, for example. There's a lot that you really have to take into account when it comes to the animation side, and I think when it comes to idol shows, typically that's character acting, right? So from the ones that are in the list here, so that would be like you said, Uma Musume, the OVA for that, or ONA, I guess. Supposedly the last 2D Idolmaster entry. Hopefully that's not true, but considering what I've seen in the future, it's concerning. And then Oshinoko, our comparison points were typically, are the performances, if they do have performances, really stand out? But that's kind of like similar to like an action highlight in a show like Jujutsu Kaisen, right? So, which also had idol stuff, I think, with Toji at one point, or was it Toto? I can't remember.
Toto, he loves
Toto, yeah,
idols.
exactly.
They're brothers.
The realistic brothers. But again, it's that consistency across the entire show, which is kind of our main push at times, because you can have a really strong episode, but does that reflect as strongly against the other nominees when they have, numerous episodes? So that's where it kind of became a little tough. Just to kind of go through really quickly, I think Road to the Top was our favorite from those. There was such a strong understanding of like when to use the proper or really unique styles for animation, but also keep it a bit real. So you've got these really intense kind of like heavy smear moments during the races, but then really gentle and kind of like clean cuts when it's something personal for the characters. And I think that's what kind of pushed it above some of the other nominees.
Now, Jamal, I want to ask you something that could put you on the spot. But it's mostly just if there's one thing that you wanted to say to the audience or something that you wanted to mention about animation, what would it be? Do you have any sort of charge or declaration?
That is quite a tough question. I do think it does come kind of back to what I was mentioning earlier, and the fact that we really have to interrogate what we mean by like good animation and what is good animation. I think there are some entries this year. If we look at, for example, Jujutsu Kaisen and episode 17 specifically, where we do have these perhaps imperfections and such that I think, I mean, whether they were intentional or non intentional is another debate for another day. But we have these imperfections within some of its animation direction and how it works and all that, that I think some people would look at it and say, like, that's bad because it doesn't look regular or typical. Or even when we look to perhaps works like Uma Musume, in which has a very different sort of take on that, what action is, in the sense that, like, yeah, it's running and all that. It's very good and well done, but I think perhaps for some people they'll be a bit like alienated as to what really makes this like why is this going so hard, like they're just running, stuff like that. And so I think it's worth understanding it. I think this category does show that quite well. I think it's worth thinking about the fact that animation comes in, to sound corny about it, all different shapes and sizes, and they're just very different approaches and whatnot. But I don't think you can. I think the important thing is that you can't come up. There's no single approach when it comes to things. It's all very story dependent and about the story you're trying to tell. Much like how no two books are written the same, even if they're about the same situation or scenario, because how you portray that is going to depend on what you're doing and what you think is best and what the artist thinks is best. And so I think it's worth thinking, I guess, a bit more. I'm kind of going on a tangent here, but I think it's really worth just thinking about how diverse animation can be and how many ways there are to do different things and convey different emotions. Ultimately, just because animation is a form of storytelling. So yeah, that's my very complicated answer that I'm not even too sure about myself.
No, it's a great answer.
Yeah, it's really good. I kind of want to play off that a bit too, and it's just something that when we're looking through shows on the jury end, that kind of approaching different types of animation and kind of thinking of what was the idea behind, using this kind of style or, being a bit more restricted with movement or, those kind of things on top of judging whether or not something is, as you may say, coming out of the oven fully cooked. There's a lot that really comes into account, and there's personal biases everywhere, right? So you're going to have certain scenes that are very strong that you maybe don't really understand why other people like as much. And I think that's really what makes animation so special, is that there's always going to be something for you that really suits your tastes. And I'm glad that that is still something that's so strong within the industry overall. But I am, at the end of the day, still a little disheartened by the kind of trends we've seen with the industry. And I think Jujutsu Kaisen, for example, being such a massive show, experiencing that kind of struggle throughout is really, really tough to see. So fingers crossed overall for situations to improve. But at the end of the day, we kind of looked at everything, thought, did they excel in creating something that is expressive, meaningful, conveys what it wants to, and looks great at the same time? And I hope that that is taken away from the list from everyone here.
I definitely hope so as well. But I think that's all the time we have. It's been a wonderful conversation, and I want to thank both of you for speaking with me.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much.